Hello, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you everyone for being here today. I don't know why you guys are all here. I'm here for the Firestone basketball game. I think everyone knows that I'm Mayor Shamsi Smalley. It's my 82nd day, I think, in this job. I want to thank everyone who's coming out today. I particularly want to thank all the city employees and AP folks. If everyone who's a city employee wants to raise your hand, please. We're a team. We've got a 2,000-person team here in city of Akron government, and a whole team of 190,000 people in our city, and then a whole variety of team beyond that, and people who work here. So we're really excited about having this here today. This is an opportunity to live out our goals of civic engagement and transparency, talking about our 2024 budget. If anyone had ever told me I'd be standing in front of you in my high school cafeteria, I had the old building, but still my high school cafeteria, talking about $815 million budget, I would have told you you're crazy, but I'm really excited about what we're going to share with you here today. If I have low energy at all, blame it on the fact that I don't get to eat for another like 2 hours here. But really excited to what we're going to share. I want to introduce to you our finance director, who maybe you know, Steve Fricker. We did a like Today Show, a whole thing at noon on the live stream on Facebook. So if you really want more after this, you can go back and watch that. But we're going to continue to share information as we go forward. I just wanted to give you a little bit of overview of what's in this budget. As I said, it's $815 million. That's a 2.1% increase from last year, mostly due to staffing costs. But we've seen, as many of you know, increases in income tax and property tax revenue with the new state valuation. And so we think that will cover the increases, that will more than cover the increases in the budget. There's $10.5 million from ARPA that is also helping support this budget. And so in future years, we're going to figure out how to close that gap. There is a 4% cost of living increase for our CSDA and ASME 1360 employees, and then a 3% increase for police, fire, and non-bargaining employees. So what does this budget do? What is it $815 million? Well, the first thing, careful, it does the $850 million doesn't get you new speakers, but it does lay out safety as our first priority. I've talked about this a lot on the campaign trail, and now it's named. Safety is the first thing that we're focused on. And so this budget funds our police department to 488 uniformed officers, the highest in 20 years. I'm really excited about that because it's really important not just to make sure that our officers aren't stressed out all the time and run ragged, but also to make sure they have time for the proactive community policing that we all want for them to be able to do, right? Because if you're just going from call to call to call to call to call to call, then you don't have time to sit on someone's front porch for 5 minutes and have a conversation and get to know them necessarily, because you're thinking the next thing is probably a bigger emergency. So we're really excited about that. We're also increasing our fire budget. I folded it at the precise wrong part, but to 402 uniformed firefighters and medics. And this is going to be a huge help, especially as we saw last year, our AMR private ambulance system that is now no longer doing those non-emergency transports. And so now our active fire folks are doing twice as many transports to the hospital as they used to. And so this new number, 402, the highest in 30 years, is really going to help out as we make sure that responses to 911 calls in those emergency moments are addressed as effectively as we can. We're also putting $1.2 million into violence intervention programming from a community side. I'm really excited about this because we've been talking about this for the last few years, but a lot of what I said I wanted to do was to take things that we've been talking about and fully get them into action. So really in the next few months, and maybe even before then, you're going to hear a lot more from Nanette and Nico and Tony and a few others about, I was looking around to where they all are, about what this violence intervention looks like, about how we intervene in the lives of people who are most likely has received a little bit of coverage in our newspaper. But throughout the transition, we spent a lot of time with the previous administration's cabinet and with our incoming group and our transition co-chairs and many others to look at what needs we have within the mayor's office, what gaps are there, where we can restructure. We eliminated 3 cabinet level positions. We moved some positions that weren't in the mayor's office into the mayor's office. There was a grants manager role that was in the finance department. We moved it into the mayor's office, so it's closer to some of our folks who are focused on the state government, federal government relations. And then we did create some new positions. Now, I'm not going to hide the fact that we created some new positions. And 8 new positions, and I think that has stuck out a little bit. That's a lot, right? And some people see it as happening. Now, I get that, but at the same time, I really want to underscore that I ran on a message saying that we were going to bring a more open, more collaborative, more strategic, and ultimately a more effective city government. And so the 8 roles, only 2 of them are cabinet roles. 6 of them are not cabinet roles. They're not these full freight salaries. They're specifically designed to try to make our city government more effective, to fill in the gaps, to help not just on macro and conceptual and high-minded issues, but in our neighborhoods too. So I'll give you 2 or 3 examples. Steve, I'm really touching into your time. But if our city depends, if the future of our city depends on whether young people growing up here get a good education, right? Then we should have someone waking up every day thinking about education in the city of Akron, right? And so we do, and we're really excited for her. If we have all of this federal and state money that we're talking about that can help relieve a burden on our taxpayers, right? Then we need folks who have a background in lobbying who can really focus on getting us to where we need to go. And Emma keeps sending me to DC and to Columbus, and I keep getting back in the middle of the night on delayed flights. But it's helping prove effective, because when we were deciding to tear down the word church, she made a couple of calls and was really persistent and helped with the Summit County Land Bank and the Ohio Department of Development find $700,000 to help cover that for our residents. $700,000. Those new positions that we've added, the total cost, the new cost is $755,000. Right? So I just want to put it in perspective. That's not a small amount of money. I don't want to downsize it, but it's less than 1/10 of 1% of this $850 million budget. So if that helps us be more effective, that helps us tackle issues in the neighborhood, that's what we're going to focus on. With that being said, I understand the concerns. I understand that folks say maybe you're doing too much too fast or what have you. So we're going to work with council. We appreciate our council members who are here tonight. We want to work collaboratively and productively. We can, if our council members want to raise their hand. Sharon. And so we are going to work together and find a budget that works for everyone. I'm almost done here with you. There's a couple of strategic initiatives that we're prioritizing. The Thrive program, which is going to support small businesses through the Development Finance Authority and the Akron Urban League, with a particular focus on Black-owned businesses. $500,000 to support the Youth Success Summit, which is going to help us take all the organizations that provide extracurricular supports to all these kids here and do it in a lot more strategic and collaborative and effective way. And then $250,000 as a down payment on our Akron Bicentennial coming up next year. And then the final thing I wanted to note is that there's a number of other things, right? This is, like I said, a city budget, 2,018 employees. We're adding a number of folks in the city service department to be more effective about our water meter project, to help us with our landscaping and park maintenance. We're adding folks in city council as a council liaison to the community. We're also adding some folks in the municipal court to help with grants, to help with a couple other things. And then we're also spending down a lot of the ARPA money. That $145 million, all of it's committed, but now is the time when we're actually spending it out, paying for those new community centers, those new pools, continuing with the water main, lead water main rehab that Mayor Horgan started. So we're really excited about what's in this budget. We think it's really effective, and we want to share it with you. We want to get your feedback. It's perfectly fine if you have concerns. right? My Firestone tennis coach is on Facebook telling me all his concerns. Right? So it's okay. It's a free country. But that's the whole point, is that we want to hear your thoughts, we want to hear your feedback, and hopefully we'll go through and pass the budget next Monday. But we're going to continue. We're going to look at participatory budgeting in the future. We're going to look at how this rolls into our capital budget going forward. And so I want all of you here to see this is what we meant when we're saying a more open, more transparent, and more collaborative city government. So with that, I will stop and give it to the expert. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you, Mayor. And likewise, the Mayor said he could hardly imagine himself standing here at his alma mater, my alma mater as well. Class of '87, also in the old building, so this is the new building, but it's good to be back here at Firestone High School. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the nuts and bolts of the budget, a little bit about the process and how we put the budget together. It's a long process. It's about a 6-month process that involves working with our departments, using some software and doing some modeling with expenditures and staffing costs and all kinds of things like that. And then obviously we present that budget to council, and then are currently working with council to put the final budget appropriation through. So, okay, so as the mayor said, this is an $815 million budget. So by comparison, last year's budget was $798 million. So as the mayor says, about a 2.1% increase. It's funding 2,055 employees this year, and many of those are within our...
Steve, you've got to move back, because you're pointing the mic towards the speakers.
Is it because I'm too far forward?
Yes,
Is that it?
yes.
All right, I'll stay back behind the line. Okay, so yes, 2,055 employees, and we will have a slide that kind of shows the breakdown by department of all those employees. Our general fund budget, and we'll talk a little bit about the different funds, and maybe one of the things I need to explain up front is the fact that this is really, we call it, the City of Akron operating budget, but in reality, it's actually 48 separate budgets, because cities like Akron, and really any public sector entity, have a special type of accounting that they do that's called fund accounting. So each one of those funds is a separate budget. Now, some of those funds interact with one another, and there's transfers back and forth between funds, and I'll kind of explain those situations and why that happens. But certain revenues can only fund certain purposes. So we'll go through and I'll explain how the different funds work and how we separate the departments and the funds into these 48 different budgets that I'm talking about. Okay, so one of the things in terms of the revenues that are funding the budget, our biggest source of income obviously is our income tax, and I'll have a little bit of detail on our income tax, but that funds, taxes alone fund about 70% of our general fund. And as the mayor mentioned, some of the costs are included this year. In addition to the fact that we have a little bit of restaffing, we also did have cost of living increases that are part of our collective bargaining agreement. So, as the mayor said, our AFSCME and CSBA unions got 4% cost of living increases, and then police, fire, and non-bargaining got 3% cost of living increases. One of the first things that we do, it's just the nature of how we budget our general fund, because the biggest piece of that is public safety. So safety makes up about 70% of our general fund. So one of the first things we do each year is we look at what classes that we can fund within the police department and the fire department. So unlike most departments, when you have a vacant position, typically like in finance or in HR or in law, you have a vacant position and you hire a single employee to replace that position. With police and fire, they have training academies, so you have to hire those employees in large classes. So for example, within the police department, we just had our largest class in several years. It was 48 employees. So one of the first things that we do when we're laying out the budget is we figure out the timing of those large classes for police and fire and figure out how those fit into the budget. So that was kind of our first priority for laying out the budget. So as the mayor mentioned, we had 488 full-time police officers. So probably hit that peak right after the class came on, and that was just about a month ago. On the fire side, we started the year with a pretty high number. The fire, as we mentioned, there's 402 full-time employees. Well, we started the year with about 397. We're going to have several leave over the next, 4 to 6 months, and then we should be doing another class of firefighters sometime this fall, like in September. So we expect that to be a class of about 30. So the biggest components of our general fund labor budget are those police and fire classes. So that's kind of what we used as a kind of our initial look at our general fund budget to figure out, what our expenditures are going to look like. Yeah, okay. Okay. Well, let's talk about this yet. So what we're talking about with this process today is our operating budget. And the city of Akron really has 2 separate budgets. So we have a capital budget, and we've already passed that. We passed that early in the year, and I believe we passed it in February. And that covers the investments that the city makes in its infrastructure. So all of the improvements that we are making to our transportation network, to our water and sewer utilities, putting all the water lines in, the sewer lines in, a lot of the CSO work that we're doing right now, the improvements to city parks, to our public facilities such as our parking decks and our city buildings that we have. That's all covered in the capital budget. And that budget is considered a long-term budget. So while we have a one-year budget that kind of has a very narrow focus, and that's what we pass each year, we also put a 5-year budget together for the capital budget. And that's because a lot of the funding sources for capital are funding sources that you will not be able to access out for 2 or 3 or 4 or even 5 years. So we're applying for federal money and state money that we will not get. We may be awarded it this year, but it won't be actually given to us until future years. So when you're budgeting for capital, you really have to plan long term. The operating budget, on the other hand, is a 1-year appropriation. So each year, our city council, we will take the budgets of city council and they will appropriate 1 year's worth of expenditures in the form of an appropriation ordinance. So that is the ordinance that is sitting in front of council right now. And that needs to be adopted by the end of March. And then throughout the year, we can amend that budget. So once it's passed, that doesn't mean you can't make changes to it. So you can add and remove from the budget. And typically, we will do that we typically do it twice or 3 times each year. And it's usually later in the year. Okay, so a little bit about the process, and one of the things I wanted to mention is that this is the process that we have been using, and I'll talk a little bit about how it's probably going to change for next year. So right now, as I mentioned, it's about a 6-month process. So starting in the fall, we start meeting with our departments and start gathering what they think their operational needs are going to be. So. And that includes both staffing and the supplies and materials and the contractual expenditures that they will have. So we meet with them and gather all of that information. We kind of work with them. We actually go through all of the budgets with them and go down through their various line items. We're looking at, their historical expenditures, what they spent this year, how much their contracts are with each vendor. So it's a very detailed process that we go through with them. At the same time, we're also building out these financial models that I mentioned. So we have a piece of software that's part of our Workday financial application that can do forecasting, and it can do calculations on staffing costs. So, city employees have, obviously they have their salaries, but there's a bunch of ancillary type expenditures that go with paying a city employee. So there's, fringe benefits, there's medical benefits, there's pension costs, there's Medicare costs, there's uniform allowances, and so there's a wide variety of different payroll costs associated with city-backed employees. So this software helps us kind of budget all of that out and figure out what those expenditures are going to be. Okay, and then in November, now this is the process that we use this year, because we have not passed our 2024 budget. We didn't pass it before the end of last year. We had to pass a temporary budget to fund the first quarter of 2024. So we did that in November. And then finally, we kind of finalized after we met with the departments, and that went all the way from September right up into, even in February, we were still meeting and fine-tuning a lot of the items in the budget. Once we have that finalized, we take all that information and assemble it into our appropriation ordinance, and that's what we present to City Council as legislation. Then we have our budget hearings with City Council, and that's what we had last week. So we had 3 days of budget meetings with the City Council, where each department gets a chance to present its operation, really. So it's presenting the budget, but it's also, just kind of educating council on what its operational functions are, telling a little bit about some of the achievements that it had from the previous year, and some of its goals for the next year. And all of that is included on the documents that we gave you for each table. So that the documents that we gave you really include 2 things. One are the goals and objectives that I just talked about, and then 2 is the actual 175-page budget document that we gave to City Council. That includes all the numbers that were presented to City Council, so it has all the individual budgets that we're talking about. And then finally, once the budget is adopted, and as I said, that has to be done before the end of March. And then also, as I mentioned, you can have budget amendments that occur throughout the remainder of the year. So once you pass the budget, it is changeable. And as I said, the city typically will do that 2 or 3 times a year. Okay, and I don't think that this is going to really be legible here, but this is the list of the count of all of our employees by department. So as I mentioned, we are funding 2,055 employees this year, which is an increase of, I believe it's 36 employees over the previous year. If you look at our funding amount in 2021, it was 1,942 employees. So we've added 113 employees in the past 3 years. About slightly over half of that is between police and fire. So the biggest increases in staffing have been in police and fire. There are also large staffing increases in our public works department. So that makes up the majority of that amount. This graph is really just a look at the funding by department. So I know that's kind of hard to read, but if you look at those 3 big slices of pie that make up about 78% of the budget, that is our police, fire, and service departments. So police, fire, and service make up 78% of the total labor cost for the city, and then the other 22% is all of the other departments, HR, finance, law, council, the courts, portions of the rest of public safety, which includes the 911 dispatchers, the Department of Neighborhoods, Okay, so here's a look at our general fund. As I mentioned, the general fund is a $210 million budget this year. We are showing it as basically a flat budget, which means our revenues match our expenditures. So we do not expect to draw on fund balance this year. If you look at that graph on the right, the city has been very successful in recent years in building up its general fund reserves. So that very first year that's showing on that graph is 2016, where we had a reserve of about $5.4 million, as opposed to last year where we have a reserve of $28.7 million. And that's largely due to monies that we received during the pandemic it's mainly from the CARES Act funds that we received during the pandemic that allowed us to grow that fund balance up. But so that gives us a 48-day supply of cash, which we think puts us in a pretty good position. If there were an economic downturn, we would have some reserves to draw on. Now, one thing I want to mention is that the city does not have a separate rainy day fund like some cities do. So this is our reserve, is our general fund reserve. Okay, this is just a little bit about our city income tax. So we have a 2.5% city income tax. That's the same as the majority of the big Ohio cities. So Cleveland, Columbus, Dayton, and Toledo, and Akron all have 2.5% income tax rates. And that 2.5% is spread out over 4 different funds. So the first 2% by charter gets split 73% to the general fund and 27% to our capital improvement fund. And then the other 2 4% taxes, one of those is for the Community Learning Center school rebuilding project. So those funds build this cafeteria that we're sitting in right now. And then the other 4% was passed in 2017, and that is dedicated to police, fire, and roads. So that has allowed us to resurface more roads, buy some much needed equipment for both our police and fire departments, and it's also funded a little bit of staffing in the police and fire departments. Okay, this is a look at our income tax collections last year. So last year we budgeted a 2% growth in our tax. And on a gross basis, that's what we got. So we got about a 1.8% growth in our income tax. But in reality, we actually had more tax that was available to fund our operations because the graph on the right is showing our income tax refunds. And you can see that spike that happened in 2022. And that is the impact of work from home on our income taxes. So we had a lot of workers that work from home that filed for refunds to get their money back from what was withheld and paid to Akron. That significantly dropped off in 2023, and therefore, on a net basis, our income tax growth was about 5%. So that's why we were able to actually add a little bit to our general fund reserve last year, because that tax performed better than we anticipated. Okay, this is a look at our property tax. So, as most of you are probably aware, there was an increase in what everyone is paying for property taxes this year. So, just to be clear, this is not the result of Akron raising property tax rates or anything like that. We have the same 10.5 mil property tax that we've had for several years. The reason why people are paying the higher taxes is because every 3 years, the county does a revaluation of all property within the city of Akron and all the cities within the county. And for Akron, the residential property values went up about 40%. So the net result of that is that Akron's total assessed valuation went up about 25%. Which is going to bring in about $7.8 million additional dollars to the city this year because of that revaluation. ARPA spending. So, as most of you know, the city was fortunate to receive about $143 million of ARPA funding from the federal government. And we actually received that money in 2 tranches, some of which we got in 2021 and some of which we got in 2022. And the rules are, we have to spend that money, we have to commit that money by the end of this year, basically, by the end of 2024. And then we have 2 additional years to spend all of that money. So we have to have everything spent by 2026. So to date, we have committed all of the $143 million, which means we know the projects that we want to spend that money on. We've obligated about 75.6, so that means that we've actually entered into contracts to spend that money. We may not necessarily have spent it yet, but we've entered into contracts to spend $75.6 million of that money. And then finally, we've actually spent about $68 million of that money. Now we expect to spend, we've budgeted about $60 million this year in ARPA. So if we spend all of that, and we probably will not spend all of that in 24, but if we did, we would have then spent about 88% of the money. So we should have spent most of this money by the end of this year, although I'm certain that we will certainly have some that will need to be spent in 2025, and then potentially even a little bit in 2026. Okay, and here's kind of a look at the various buckets of where we've committed the funds. So $8.5 million is committed to violence prevention, and those are a combination of various programming, mentoring type programming for Akron's youth, as well as some safety related technology type things. So we've invested in there's a corridor on South Exchange Street that is getting some camera technology put in. We funded that. We had a Ring doorbell camera program, so we funded that. So it's a combination of programming and some technology purchases, all in the area of violence prevention. Then we have our parks and public spaces. So this is, first of all, we are redoing 3 of our community centers. So we have rebuilt the Ed Davis Community Center and the Patterson Community Center, and are about to get started on the Reservoir Community Center. And then in addition, we've rebuilt 2 of our pools, so the Perkins Pool and the Reservoir Pool are also part of this project. And then we're also making some improvements to our Lock 3 park downtown, and then also some improvements to the Summit Lake area using that money. The access to healthcare, that includes, we're funding an Access Point Community Health Center, so it'll be like a community health clinic that will serve Akron residents. And then also in there is the RIP medical debt relief program. So we funded $500,000 for that program, and they are working through that right now, where they will start buying up debt from Akron residents and retiring that debt. And then the Akron residents will be notified that their debt has been retired. So they do not need to register for that or sign up or anything. That's something that will all be handled by RIP Medical, who is the one that is doing this task of retiring this debt. Our housing program was kind of a combination of residential housing, rehab, and that's something that we've done a number of houses. We haven't had the pace of rehab that we were hoping to get, so we're kind of looking at that program now to see if we can do that a little bit more efficiently. So it included those rehab type projects, as well as a little bit of new housing, and then also funding some of our neighborhood community development corporations that are doing new housing. Small business growth. So we funded, that's mainly small grants grants to small businesses, so that's $2.2 million. Public utilities is both putting in new water lines for the city, as well as replacing a lot of the lead service lines that are in residential properties. So that's something Acton's been very successful at. We have a very low number of those. We're trying to eliminate all of those within the city of Akron. And then the budget stabilization, as I mentioned, we're using some of that money to balance the general fund budget. So we have $35 million allocated to that. And then premium pay is we had some payments that were made to our various bargaining units and to non-bargaining. Everyone except for appointed employees got some premium pay due to the COVID pandemic. Okay, and then finally, in terms of ARPA, that QR code, if you click on that, that will take you to a live website that has all of the real-time expenditure information for the ARPA program. So that'll tell you everything, all the vendors, all the projects that we spent money on. So yeah, give that a try on your phone, and there's a lot of information out there.
Thank you, Steve, who's our Director of Finance and very much in need of a drink of water. That was fabulous, thank you. So for the rest of the evening and time, what we plan to do, and I'm hoping that everyone is sat at a table with some of our wonderful staff, we're going to have some table conversation, and the cabinet members and staff who are with us this evening will make sure that everyone has signed up. If you wouldn't mind sharing your name and your email with us, in case we need to follow up, and so that we can make sure you're connected with our newsletter and so on. And then they'll be asking some questions at the table, taking your questions, giving answers if they can, and we'll have our fantastic finance folk, Steve and Mike and Teresa, floating around so that invariably when a question comes up that we can't answer, we'll make sure that we get that answer for you. The mayor will also be floating around to respond. And then at the end of that time, we want to have a time when we can address some of those questions directly to the mayor. We'll round the evening out with a moderated conversation.